Cooking for Health. I'm Dr. Mary DiBartolo, Professor of Nursing at Salisbury University and host of the program. I welcome back Katie Dorsch. You've been with us many times for these installments under the Focus on Health umbrella.
Yes.
You are a dietitian, and you are the outpatient dietitian at Atlantic General Hospital.
That's right.
I'm so excited to have you today.
Yeah.
We talked about doing this show because apparently there's such a thing as a bean club that you're going to tell us about a little later.
Yes.
But the show today is the benefit of beans and cooking with beans
That's right.
for more healthy meals. So let's get started, and please tell us about the different types of beans and all the wonderful things they can do for us in our bodies.
Yeah, so it's great to be back. I'm surprised we haven't done a bean show before because it's one of my favorite foods, one of my favorite, health foods. So I'm glad to introduce you to some different kinds of beans today. So this show came about because I mentioned I was in a bean club. So I get shipments of beans every quarter from a company called Rancho Gordo. And so they sell what's called heirloom beans.
What does that mean exactly, heirloom beans?
Yeah, so heirloom beans, they're not necessarily commercially available. They're not normal beans like we think of, like just regular black beans. So they've been kind of phased out of our commercial food system. But they're grown by some specialty companies. You can order heirloom seeds from, heirloom seed companies. You could even plant these beans that we have here and grow your own beans. But they come in a lot of different varieties, textures, flavors. So there's a world of beans beyond what is on the grocery store shelf.
And I imagine for these more unusual beans, you can find recipes online.
Sure.
On how to integrate them, or they can be pretty much exchanged as for most bean recipes.
Yes, so that's one thing that you kind of have to figure out when you're cooking with heirloom beans, is because you're not necessarily going to find a recipe, tons of recipes online for Christmas lima beans or Jacob's cattle beans.
Yeah, perhaps explain which each of these beans are.
Sure. So I brought some kind of examples today, a few samples from my stash to show what these beans look like. So here we have the Rio Zappe beans, which are a beautiful kind of brown and black swirled, very chocolatey looking. Those are some of my favorites. These are what we call Jacob's cattle beans. And you can see they have these beautiful kind of maroon brown speckles.
They're almost too pretty to eat.
They are. They're works of art in and of themselves. I love them. Here we have Christmas lima beans. So you might be used to, the lima beans that you ate as a kid. Mm-hmm. Kind of those green canned or frozen lima beans. And these are a lot different than that.
Why are they called Christmas? I'm looking for a Santa Claus face or something.
I actually don't know why they're called Christmas lima beans. I'll have to investigate that, but that is what they're called.
Okay.
And then this is a bean a lot of us are probably used to seeing. It's similar to a pinto bean, but it's actually a cranberry bean. And you can see it has that beautiful kind of maroon speckles on that brown bean.
Now, do they have distinctive flavors, or do they just look different?
Yeah, so they do have distinctive flavors and textures. It's kind of easy to categorize beans as, we have white beans, things like navy beans, cannellini beans, even white lima beans. So you can kind of put those in the broad category of white beans.
What about butter beans? I've seen butter beans.
Yeah, so butter beans would be like a white bean. And then we have dark beans, so things like black beans or these Rio Zappe beans.
And of course, you have some chickpeas over there, but
right.
They're called garbanzo beans, correct?
Right, garbanzo beans, that's another name for chickpeas. So they would be, if you don't like chickpeas, substituting another white bean is a good idea. So they kind of fall into that category.
Are lentils a bean? Do they fall in the bean category?
Yes.
Or legumes? Or?
Mm-hmm. So they kind of fall under this broad category of beans and legumes. So lentils, that's another good, easy to cook bean.
I remember my mother made lentil soup a lot when I was young.
Yeah.
And I despised it then. And now I love lentil soup. And lentils are so good for you. They say they're brain food. They're very important for cognitive health.
Yes. So lentils are another good. I didn't bring any lentils with me today, but there are red lentils, there's black lentils, there's green and brown lentils. So there's all kinds of lentils that you can use.
So when you get these fresh beans, do you have to soak them then before cooking?
So there's a couple different ways to cook dried beans, which is what we're gonna, show to begin with. I like to cook them just on the stovetop. Sometimes I cook them in my slow cooker. Some people like to cook them in a pressure cooker, which can speed up the cooking time. I don't prefer that method just because you can't check them while they're cooking. So I like to have a method I can check them with. So some people do soak their beans. You certainly can. You don't have to, though. That's kind of a common misconception that, oh, I didn't soak my beans, I can't cook beans today.
What about another misconception I'd like to ask you about, or maybe I'm wrong, but I read, a lot of people stay away from beans because they're worried about the gassiness of them. Mm-hmm. But I read an article a bit ago saying that the more you eat the beans, your body adapts and you will not have as many issues with gas. Is that true? Because that would be an incentive for many people.
Right. So that is a common, concern with eating beans. We've all heard the nursery rhyme, beans, beans, the magical fruit. Mm-hmm. So eating beans more frequently can help reduce the gas that you produce from beans, just like, increasing any high fiber food in your diet. The more consistently that you eat it, the less gassy you become. Soaking your beans can also reduce those gas-producing compounds too. So soaking your beans, draining and rinsing them before cooking.
Do the canned beans have just as much nutrition than fresh beans?
They do. So you absolutely don't have to always cook your beans from scratch or use dried beans. Canned beans are going to have the same nutrition benefits. They're going to have a lot of fiber, protein, some carbohydrates, lots of B vitamins, magnesium. So all these things that are especially good for our heart health too, as well as our gut health.
And a good amount of fiber, correct?
Yes, lots of fiber. So they include soluble and insoluble fiber. So soluble fiber especially is the kind of fiber that can help lower our cholesterol. So they're definitely a good thing to include in our heart healthy diet.
Well, it's good to know about the canned beans because sometimes I just don't have time to worry with all that. In fact, I don't think I've ever soaked a bean. I just buy them in the can. But you're inspiring me.
Yes. I think there's a lot of misconceptions about cooking dried beans that it's really difficult to do. And it does take some time, but it's not difficult. So hopefully we can show that today.
So what's our first recipe we're making with the beans?
Yeah, so the first thing we're going to make is an easy black bean soup. And this soup I actually really like using beans that I've cooked from scratch for because we use a little bit of the bean broth. And when you cook your beans from scratch, that broth is really flavorful. You could certainly use some canned black beans if you prefer though.
How long does it take then to cook the black beans
so,
if they're dried?
If they're dried and they haven't been soaked, just cooking on the stovetop, I would start checking them after an hour to see where they are. They could take up to 2 hours at a low simmer. If you're going to throw them in the slow cooker, just black beans I bought from the grocery store, I usually put them on low all day and they're done when I get home. If you soak them, of course, that will speed up the cooking time a little bit.
Okay.
So again, checking, right at an hour is kind of a good rule of thumb. Okay.
Very good. Let's get started.
Okay. So first to cook our beans, we need a pot. So here we just have a half pound of black beans that we are going to put in our pot. We also want to include some aromatics here. So what looks like, kind of leftover kitchen scraps, we're actually going to put in our pot. So we had chopped up an onion for the soup recipe. So we have a little bit of the end of the onion left. And we're just going to throw that in the pot to give it some flavor. We have a bay leaf and a couple of cloves of garlic. You know, we could also throw, you know, some dried chilies in here, or, you know, a chunk of carrot or a piece of celery. So kind of anything that can give some extra flavor to our beans, we can throw in the pot.
Just like when you cook chicken broth.
Exactly, like when you're making a broth. So what we're going to do, we're going to fill our pot with water, and then we'll get it boiling. So what I like to do is really bring our beans up to a rapid boil, let them boil for a few minutes, and then we'll turn the heat down to kind of a low simmer and just leave it alone.
So for about at least an hour, you say? Okay. Is that the approximate time for all types of beans, or are there bean-specific cooking times?
So if you are buying heirloom beans, like from Rancho Gordo, you know, they're all going to cook a little quicker. They're very fresh beans. The beans we buy from the grocery store are sometimes a little bit older, so they take a little bit longer to cook. So old beans take longer to cook than fresher beans. Of course, smaller beans take less time than big beans. So these black beans are going to cook quicker than, say, our Christmas lima beans, which are a little bit bigger in size. There's also a variety called Royal Corona beans. I don't have any of those to show you today, but they're really big beans. So of course, those are going to take much longer to cook. Another exception is lentils, because they're so small. Lentils on the stove really only take about 20-25 minutes to cook.
They can get mushy pretty quick, can't they?
They can get mushy pretty quick if you overcook them. So important to keep a close eye on those.
Okay.
Most beans, I like to start with kind of a rapid boil and then let them simmer a little bit. Some other varieties of beans, like kidney beans specifically, you do need to do a hard boil for about 10 minutes. They do have a compound in them that, if not cooked out, can actually cause some illness in us. A bad reaction.
I think I'll stick with the canned on that one.
Right. Yes. Canned kidney beans might be the better choice if you're concerned about that. But for other types of beans, that's not a concern. But I still like to do kind of a rapid boil.
I see you brought your induction cooktop again.
Yes.
Very nifty. Huh?
Yes.
Much quicker to get to a boil.
It is much quicker. So we can already see some bubbles coming up from this induction cooktop versus our electric stove behind us that just takes a long time. So gets us beans quicker.
Great.
So our black beans have cooked. And when you're checking for doneness, you want to make sure that they're nice and tender. But you also want to pull them off before they're, totally falling apart. If you do happen to overcook your beans, that's a good time to make refried beans, bean dip, or a soup that you have to puree. So you certainly can use overcooked beans if you happen to.
Don't throw them out. Plenty of other things.
Right, plenty of uses for them. But typically I'll just, take a bean, take a bite and check and see how tender it is. I do add a little bit of salt towards the end of cooking time. If I check them and they're not quite tender yet, but almost there, that's when I usually add some salt to the beans. So these are all finished. You can see we saved some of our bean broth too. Beans also freeze really well. So if you have a pound of beans, I tend to cook the whole pound at once, and then I can freeze in about 2-cup portions, and that's the equivalent to a can of beans. So in addition to being really nutritious, they're also really affordable. A bag of these black beans at the grocery store is about $2.
And high in protein.
Yep, half a cup of beans has about 7 to 8 grams of protein.
Very good.
So that adds up. So we are going to start by making our soup. Now that our beans are cooked, we're going to add a little bit of olive oil to our pot. And then we are going to add we have some chopped white onion. You could also use a yellow onion if that's what you have on hand. We are also going to add, this is about 3 cloves of minced garlic. Again, you could use the jar of already minced garlic if you'd like to. Save yourself some time. So we're going to saute the onions and garlic for a few minutes until they get nice and soft. And smelling good in here already.
Nothing like the smell of onions and garlic.
Right,
together.
yes.
Yep.
People will be coming down the hallway asking what we're doing.
We are here at MAC, by the way, who graciously allows us to come here and do
Yes.
our cooking shows. So
Yes.
we're very thankful for MAC.
Yes. I think there are some participants next door, so we'll make them hungry. So this is going to go for a few minutes. And also going into our pot today, we have some spices. So we have chili powder, we have cumin, and we have coriander that are going to go into our soup. We also have some chipotle chilies. So this is a can, they're already diced up, which is very convenient. You can also buy them whole and chop them up yourself. And kind of a secret ingredient to the soup, and I think why it turns out so well, is we have some chocolate.
Is that milk chocolate, dark chocolate?
So this is actually a Mexican ground chocolate. You could use a dark chocolate. You could even use some cocoa powder.
Now, do you have to get that in a specialty store?
So this chocolate actually does also come from Rancho Gordo. So I use it a lot in dishes like this with some dark beans to really kind of give things that depth of flavor.
Yeah, I've seen chocolate used as an ingredient in other recipes to add some rich flavor to it.
Exactly. So it's definitely a place where you want to use some dark chocolate and not milk chocolate. So we're going to go ahead and add our spices into the pot. Gonna give that a stir. And then we also have 2 cups of vegetable broth. If you didn't need this soup to be vegetarian, you could also use chicken broth. Okay. And then I'm gonna crank this heat up a little bit. So we have, this recipe calls for either 2 cans of beans and a little bit of their broth. That would be close to 4 cups of beans if we've cooked them ourselves. And you can see I've saved some of this broth. Again, I think that's a really important part of this recipe, is having a good bean broth.
It's a little thick too. It adds some thickness to the soup.
So we're gonna go ahead and put our beans and our broth in there. And we're gonna let this simmer for about 15 to 20 minutes. We're also gonna add a little bit of salt to our soup. Here we have some coarse kosher salt. So it's a good opportunity to talk about the different salts. So as you can see, this coarse kosher salt, much bigger salt crystals than say just a regular table salt. So a teaspoon of regular salt is going to be much saltier than a teaspoon of coarse kosher salt.
Because it did look like you put a good bit of salt in.
Yes, so I put a good bit of salt in.
Because
but,
you're using coarse.
right, we have to remember these are big pieces of salt. So you need a little more than you might with just a regular table salt. So our soup is boiling. We're just going to turn this down a little bit now to kind of a gentle simmer. And while this is cooking, we can go ahead and work on our salad.
And what is this salad we're making?
So the salad we're making, it's a Middle Eastern salad called Balela. So it uses chickpeas, olives, sun-dried tomatoes, some fresh tomatoes, and some spices to kind of make a really flavorful salad. So you
And we will post links to these recipes at the end of the program.
Yes, we will have links to the recipes so that you can make these at home. The chickpeas, since they have a lot of protein in them, it could stand alone as a vegetarian dish, or you could serve it on the side with something else if you wanted to. So I'm gonna toss the salt over my shoulder and we'll get started on that.
Okay, terrific.
So to start, we have our chickpeas. So you can use 2 cans of drained chickpeas, or again, if you were cooking your chickpeas from fresh, about 3.5-4 cups of cooked and drained chickpeas. So we're going to go ahead and add that to the bowl. And we have some diced green pepper, some diced jalapeno pepper. Again, if you don't like spice, you could leave the jalapeno out. And then we have some chopped green onion in here as well. So very colorful already. Okay.
See, we're going to be adding some red to the mix soon.
Yes.
With the tomatoes.
So
what else do you have? What's that?
So these are some sliced sun-dried tomatoes. We also have black and green olives that we're going to add here. And if you've ever heard of somebody mention, umami flavors, these olives and sun-dried tomatoes are really good sources of those flavors.
Is that flavor also in Asian food?
Correct. Yep. So things like soy sauce, mushrooms, give us that kind of umami flavor. That's kind of hard to point down, but it's a very, makes everything taste better. So we're also going to add some fresh tomatoes too. You can slice them or you can leave them whole. It's your preference. And we also have a lot of chopped fresh parsley.
So about a half a cup or a cup?
Yep, this is about a 1/2 cup of chopped parsley. When you chop parsley, you can also leave these tender stems in there. You don't have to discard them. So we can toss that in.
I've always discarded them. Adds time to cooking when you're like picking through the
Right,
stems.
You don't have to pick all the little leaves off the stems. We're also going to throw in some fresh basil. You could also use mint if you didn't have basil. And then we're going to make a dressing. So I've already kind of put everything in here, but we have some olive oil, about a 1/4 cup of olive oil. We have some white wine vinegar, some lemon juice, and then we have a couple interesting spices I wanted to talk about. We have Aleppo pepper, which is a really mildly spicy pepper.
Never heard of that.
Yeah,
Okay.
so
There's so many different peppers now.
there's
spicy
so many
peppers,
different
yeah.
peppers. If you didn't have Aleppo pepper, you could substitute some paprika and maybe a little dash of cayenne for some spice. We're also adding some sumac, which sumac is a berry, again used a lot in Middle Eastern cooking. And it has kind of a citrusy or lemony flavor. So if you didn't have ground sumac, you could add some lemon zest.
Now, where would you find that? Would you have to buy it online?
In place of this. So yeah, I bought these online. These are from Penzies. So the sumac and Aleppo, not necessarily readily available. But again, there are substitutes,
Okay.
like the paprika and the cayenne or some lemon zest in place of the sumac. But
I use
figured
lemon zest a lot in my cooking. It
Right.
really adds a lot of nice flavor.
it does a lot of strong flavor. So I figured since I had them, we would use them today. Good opportunity to talk about them. And we have a little bit of salt and pepper in here too. So we've just put it in a jar and we're going to shake it.
All the uses of a ball jar.
Yes. Can never have too many mason jars.
I know, I keep them around.
Okay. I'm just going to pour this over. So this is the kind of salad that's going to hold up really well with some dressing on it. We are going to toss all of this together. So good thing to bring to, will be a good Christmas dish.
Yes, it is.
With all the green and red in there. Or, you know, a holiday potluck or 4th of July barbecue. Something a little different.
Looks delicious.
And that's our salad. Should we give this a try while
Sure,
we're waiting
let's do that.
for our soup?
So a soup and salad lunch.
So ideally we would let this sit for a little bit just for the flavors to meld and that dressing to really get in our chickpeas. But you certainly could eat it right away. Okay.
Can't wait to try it.
Thank you.
I'm usually not big on olives, but I imagine they mix well with these ingredients.
Yeah, I never liked olives until a few years ago, and now I can't get enough of them.
That is very good. The olives do add a lot to it.
That kind of briny saltiness.
Do you necessarily need the sun-dried tomatoes, or is it more of a texture thing since it has real tomatoes in here?
You could certainly leave them out. I think they add a lot of flavor. Just a more intense tomato flavor. But if you didn't have them, or if you didn't want to use them, you could go just with the fresh tomatoes.
That is very good. And chickpeas are so good for you. Sometimes I like roast them in the oven and make them crispy.
Right. You can, you know, toss them with some spices, and they do make a really good snack.
So Katie, I just have to ask you, how did you find out about this bean club?
The Bean Club started several years ago. The founder of Rancho Gordo, his name is Steve. And the company is based in California, in Napa. So out in that region, there's a lot of wine clubs. So he thought it would be kind of funny. Let's start a bean club, like a wine club.
That is funny.
Being from Napa. Little did he know that it would take off as well as it did. So I had actually first become a member kind of in the early days of the club, which is when I got this apron, was actually one of my first shipments. Took a break for a while I was going through school, cutting back on expenses. And by the time I wanted to join again, there was actually a wait list for the Bean Club. They're a pretty small company.
So they can only accommodate so many people.
So many people,
shipments to?
right, at a time. You know, beans are a crop just like anything else. So they're subject to, you know, fluctuations in yield. You know, you can't always get a consistent amount of beans. So since then, the wait list has grown and grown and grown. Luckily this year they started opening up a lot more spots. I was able to get in pretty quickly a few years ago. This year I got another friend into the Bean Club. We were both anxiously waiting for that email to come through.
Oh my.
So yeah, I actually have a shipment of beans coming this weekend. So you get, I believe it's 6 pounds of beans. And then there's always a little something extra like a spice or popcorn or a grain, an apron.
I imagine you pay a fee every year, correct?
Right. So there is a fee with the quarterly bean box. But you get to try a lot of different varieties of beans. You know, things that might not necessarily be available to the general public for sale. You can kind of get your hands on.
Very nice.
Through the Bean Club.
Membership has its benefits, huh?
It does, yes. So yeah, I like cooking beans. You know, cook a pound of beans on a Sunday, let's say, and then you can kind of use them throughout the week.
Yeah, I like your idea. You can freeze them and use them as you need to. Very good.
Exactly.
All right, is the soup about ready?
I think the soup is about ready. So we'll go ahead and add our chocolate. So again, the recipe calls for 3 tablespoons of chopped dark chocolate. So a very dark chocolate. We don't want a lot of sugar or milk interfering with that chocolate flavor. You could also substitute a tablespoon of cocoa powder if you have that. A lot of us have that on
Yeah,
hand.
I keep that around in my cabinet.
So we're going to stir that in and kind of let that melt down a little bit. And again, that's going to add some really rich, dark flavor. The soup, you could also, you can kind of leave the beans whole if you wanted to puree it a little bit, either in a blender or with an immersion blender, like a hand blender. You could, I'm going to go ahead and just kind of
Smash a few?
like gently mash some beans to give it a little more texture. So if you have a spatula.
I saw a recipe the other day for smashed carrots, and then we have smashed burgers. Is that a popular thing to do now, is to smash
It's
things?
to smash things. I've never seen a smashed carrot.
I just saw it on a recipe for it. Cook
I've
it in the oven.
I've had, my husband just ate a smashed burger last night, and I've done smashed potatoes before, but never a carrot.
Oh, there you go.
So I'm going to go ahead and give this a taste and see if we need to add any more salt. Okay? I'm going to grab a spoon. I think it's good.
Very nice. We'll spoon it up. I'm ready to try it. You know, I wanted to mention this thing. Between the olives and the different herbs in there, it's really flavorful.
It's very flavorful. So it seems really simple on paper, but just having a few really good ingredients can make a really great salad. So I'm looking forward to eating this today. So we're going to move this out of our way, and we'll go ahead and spoon out some of our soup to try. And we can garnish this a few different ways. Today we have some cilantro and avocado. Some
of my favorite things when I'm cooking Mexican.
Right.
Great.
You could certainly put some sour cream, some salsa, even some chopped onion if you wanted to put that on there. Have a little cilantro for each of us. And then, Mary, if you could hand me that little knife. So we've cut our avocado in half. Kind of an easy way to prep your avocado is to cut it into cubes while it's still in the skin, and then we'll scoop it out.
And avocados got such a bad rap for years, and now they're figured to be one of the better things to eat.
So back in the 90s, when everybody was scared to eat fat, we didn't eat a lot of avocados, and then we realized they were good for us.
Because they have a good kind of fat in them.
They do. They have a lot of unsaturated fats in them, which are good for us. So, of course, when you cut an avocado, it's important to be careful if you're doing it in your hand. There's a lot of injuries related to cutting avocados. So be careful if you're not used to it. Do it on a cutting board. We can scoop out.
It's quite easy that way.
Yeah. It's important also to make sure your avocado is ripe when you do this.
What's the trick to that? That's my problem at the grocery store. I'm like, okay, I need it today, or I need it in 2 days.
All right. So you want to look for an avocado that has a nice dark color on the outside. And then I usually give it a soft press towards the top, towards that stem. And if it's, feels soft up there.
Gives a little bit, but not too much, obviously.
Exactly.
Some of them get very, very soft, and
they can get
wouldn't be a good idea.
A little too ripe. Mm-hmm. So we'll give you a little avocado as well.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Spoon for you.
All right. That's very good. I love cilantro on just about anything. But I think it's one of those spices, herbs, I mean, either you like it or you don't.
Right.
You know, a lot of people don't care for it. But
To some people, cilantro, it's actually a genetic thing. Cilantro can end up tasting like soap. So when,
that's a genetic thing?
So
That reminds me of the asparagus thing. That's a genetic thing.
Yes,
Not
yes.
everyone's urine smells that way
right.
after eating asparagus. So I didn't know that about cilantro. I always learn something cooking with you.
So when some people say they hate cilantro, that's why. I wouldn't want to eat soap either.
Some of us did as kids. Or at least Ralphie did on Christmas Story, right? Not a good flavor. But this is excellent. And so healthy for you, correct?
Yeah, a very simple soup. So it's kind of a good thing to have in your back pocket when you don't know what's for dinner. Even just having a couple of cans of black beans in your pantry, that's something, even though I cook mostly from dried beans, I still do keep a couple of cans of black beans in my pantry.
So can you freeze the soup as well? Put it in portions and freeze it?
Yep, so something like a soup, that's going to freeze really well. If you can't eat it all yourself, it'll keep in the freezer for a few months for sure. So just cool it down completely, and then I like to freeze it in kind of like 2-cup portions or whatever size you're going to eat leftover. The salad, this will keep. This will not freeze well.
The salads don't.
Right? But this will keep for at least 3 days, I'd say. After that time, it might start getting a little sad looking, but it should keep for a few days. If this is too much for you to eat, you could always cut the recipe in half to make it a little more manageable portion.
Right, if you just have 2 people, that's a lot of salad.
It's a lot of salad for just 2 people, like in my household.
It's more for 4 people, I imagine.
Yeah, 4 to 6, I would say. Or good for a party if everybody's, just going to take a spoonful.
Very nice. Well, thank you so much. Just terrific recipes, and we are going to post them at the end of the show.
Yep.
And people can check out the link and try making them at home.
I hope that they do.
So thanks again for coming and sharing your beans with us.
Thanks for having me. I'm glad to talk about the beans.
And thank you for joining us for this edition of Focus on Health here on PAC 14.